Start and
You can start. All right.
thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to November's virtual speaker presentation featuring guest speaker Peter Tilley on the history of the Ottawa Mission. My name is Scheherazade Khan, and I and Jacob Saloom will be your hosts tonight. Before we begin, let's take a moment to acknowledge whose land it is that we meet on tonight. For thousands of years before colonial times, the members of Indigenous communities traveled from far and wide to gather at the meeting of the three rivers, the Ottawa, the Gatineau, and the Rideau, from the Chaudière Falls to the mouth of the Gatineau River. This area is rich in natural resources, plants, animals, and fish, and also provided a convenient meeting place for trade and communication among communities. Of special significance are the burial place at Hull Landing and the Chaudière Falls, a sacred place for meeting and sharing in ceremonies. The burial grounds in the Ottawa-Gatineau corridor, including Hull Landing, were important for rituals of respect and bonding with the landscape. Victoria Island, located under the Portage Bridge, continues to provide this sacred space to local and visiting Indigenous peoples. The National Capital Region, which includes the city of Ottawa, remains unceded Algonquin Anishinaabeg territory. We encourage our members and guests to reflect on this, our connected histories, and ways we can contribute to reconciliation. Thank you. Next, we would like to extend our thanks to the City of Ottawa, the Province of Ontario, and last but never least, to our membership. Without your support, none of what the Historical Society of Ottawa does would be possible. I'd also like to note that 2023 has been a significant year for the HSO, as it marks our 125th anniversary of our founding in 1898. Before I introduce Peter, a reminder to everyone to kindly keep your settings on mute so as to not interfere with our speaker's presentation, and turn off your video feeds once we get going. It'll assist with the overall transmission as well. Tonight's presentation will be followed by a Q&A session, so during the presentation, please start typing your great questions into the chat box. It is my honor to now introduce Peter Tilley. Peter has been the CEO of the Ottawa Mission since June 2013. Peter, alongside the Ottawa Mission's Board of Directors and senior management team, have worked tirelessly to enhance the mission services to the homeless in areas of mental health supports, addiction and trauma services, housing outreach, and much more. Peter served for 14 years as the executive director of the Ottawa Food Bank, and he has also served as a part-time professor at Algonquin College. He is a member of the Ottawa Board of Health and currently serves as the chair of the board of Ottawa Inner City Health. He is also a board member on the Alliance to End Homelessness and Soldiers Helping Soldiers. Peter volunteers at Parkdale United Church for the In From the Cold Dinner program, and most importantly, he is a proud father. Peter has accomplished much in his life, and it is a privilege to have him here tonight to tell us about the Ottawa Mission, which is one of Ottawa's oldest downtown shelters for the homeless, and which offers crucial services and to help our most vulnerable community members. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Scheherazade. I just want to make sure you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Great. And people, you'll have to forgive me if every now and then I'm here at work. So it's been a long day, and every now and then the speaker system may go off and you'll hear somebody being paged. I'll try and hit mute before that happens. So where you can see by the slide, we've been celebrating for a few years now, 1 million hours and counting. And I can tell you a story that a few years ago in 2020, we were sitting in a management team meeting, and our chaplain was looking down at his mobile device, and we were in June then, and he said, "Hey, that's kind of neat." We said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, I'm just sitting here playing around doing the math. We were founded in 1906, September." He said, "Do you realize that we're coming up on 1,000,000 hours of service to the community?" And it sort of took us all by surprise, and we thought, wow, 1,000,000 hours. That's a lot of effort. 24/7, don't forget, a shelter, a homeless shelter. So a true 1,000,000 hours of service to the community, never closed on Christmas or Easter or any holidays or weekends or Mondays, always open. So we celebrated that then, and to do so, we went back through the annals. Very fortunately, the people over the years, we have a big safe down in the basement where we've kept a lot of our archives. And you'll see some of those pictures in this presentation tonight when I go here. So we're just going to take a run through some of the key impact times for this city. So I imagine most of this group that I'm speaking to would be well aware of some of the history I'm going to be sharing with you of our city and what things were like, but just the impact and how the mission has had to transition and change during those periods, and how we've serviced the community, and to this time where I'll share with you some of the challenges we're facing now, and then we'll take some questions and have a discussion, if you'd like, on what's happening current or past, and if I can recount much of the past. But it was a great delve into history. So we're going to look at the early years. This is an original ledger book, a list of names. You can see the date in January of 1907, the people who were new, who would have been booking into the shelter. This is actually recorded in our, as I said, in our annals downstairs in the vault. This is, I was reminded by some members of the Historical Society that our building, what we call the Stone House front, has been here since before 1906 when we were founded. And as you can see here, this coin says 1861. We were designated a heritage property in 1991, so there'll be no fancy renovations of the properties here at the Mission. We had to do one, and boy, what a song and dance with bylaw when we wanted to convert the former addictions program into a health clinic. And that's what we did finally, thanks to the support of city bylaw and our councillor at the time. And I'll just start here somewhat to take us back to, you can see here the date on this, when they decided they would set up a homeless shelter in September 20th, 1906. These are the first recorded minutes of a motion that was being passed back then of the intention to start up this shelter, then the Union Mission for Men. And you can see on George Street is where we were first founded. We expanded over here to Waller in 1912. So I wanted to take us back for many on this call. I know you would appreciate on this discussion what it was like back in 1906, over 1,000,000 hours ago now. You know, it was a different time then out on George Street when we started up the mission. Canada had a population of 6.5 million people. More than 50% of Canadians lived in rural areas. Women and Indigenous peoples were not allowed to vote. The average life expectancy back then was 50 years. And Ottawa's population was that of 110,000 people. Different times, where in 2020, we see that when we celebrated 1,000,000 hours, our population was 37 million then, and 80% of the people gravitated towards and lived in cities. So quite a change. Most people now, as you know, you've seen recent news that they live above 80 years as we move into the future. So quite a different time. We were set up back then because there were a lot of people. I saw one article that referred to them as hobos, who were living on the Ottawa River and living down where the Weston area is now, in the convention center there, on the train tracks. and a group of business people realized these people were freezing during the winter, and they were without food. So they wanted to set up a shelter system, a place where they could get food and a bed, 3 hots and a cot, as we still say today, the basic necessities of life. So here's some early pictures of those days, what it was like there in the beginning years. By 1901, we had, by 1907, we were then called the Union Mission for Men. We moved here, as I said, in 1912 for the big budget cost of $20,000. And immediately our role as we went through the first decade became that of soldiers who were returning home from the First World War. People suffering what was then called shell shock, which we'd probably now describe in several forms of PTSD, but that term wasn't used, and it was just get on with it. A lot of broken people found their way inside our doors. I like these historic photos, though, because you can see even these people who are homeless at the table. They're all dressed in suits. Many of them have hats on their knees, and many of them are wearing ties. And you can see back then it used to be 10 cents for a meal, and that for a bed sometimes, or you could get a voucher, as you see below, where there was no price for those who were truly homeless. They would provide that. So back then, I remember reading, I was so impressed with the original superintendent, as the position was called then, a man's named James Joad, who gave of himself 27 years to this organization. He was the first founding leader of this organization. He was described as an outstanding ambassador for the shelter. During his tenure, he vowed that no man would ever be turned away the first night that they came to the mission. And we did great work back then, serving the people. There's a shot of the beds back then, quite different. I'm going to later show you in this presentation. I'm going to show you some slides of how things are now. Some of you may have been down for a tour, but interesting to see the metal frame beds. There's the washrooms, not very clean, but serviceable. And then came, as we know, the Great War, as the First World War was referred to. And as I said, so many people who were pressed into coming inside our doors, suffering from all things. There's the original kitchen. The area that is now our waiting area was the dining hall. We've expanded our footprint over time. And then I wanted to talk about the Great Test, the Great Depression. Most of us know, we can see this here, ledger again, March 1929. We all know that everything changed as we knew it. The Roaring Twenties came to a roaring halt on October 29th, 1929, as the New York stock market crashed at unbelievable levels. Thousands of businesses were suddenly closed. Thousands of people were suddenly without income, without a job, and it was very tough. Things remained that way until we headed into World War II. Much of that, but our numbers, the number of meals in 1929, we were serving 73,000 people a year. By 1932, that number had increased to 425,662 people. It was just sixfold. Unbelievable to think that that could have happened. I remember reading the records, the minutes of how they were scrambling to keep the doors open, scrambling to live by their vow that somebody would be fed. It was just very, very difficult times, constant appeals to the public to keep the doors open. But Mr. Joad was a determined individual, and he saw us through those years, and we provided food and shelter to many people, as you saw in suits and ties. Many people who were formerly housed were now in a terrible state. There's a nice description of how it was back then, and you can see that chart down there of the growth and the spike in the meals as we moved through to 20. And as I said, by 32, the numbers had really grown. But life inside the shelter was drab and basic. There wasn't much to do. Excuse me. This is one of my favorite pictures, again, where you see these individuals with hats on their knees, almost all of them. And again, then as far as then, it was definitely a men's shelter. I'm sure women had poor services back then. It was a different time, and now we just do the beds for the men and for our addictions program, but we're open up to women for all our other programming for meals and everything else. And that, so the post-war years, we became a refuge after the Second World War. I love that term. That's about it. Soap, soup, and salvation. So we, again, here's a ledger from February 1941. The Second World War, where it was we redefined ourselves, and again, this PTSD that wasn't defined or even talked about became a time when people who came home at the end of the Second World War, many turned to alcoholism. It was rampant, and the Ottawa Mission became almost a drying out center, or just a wet center, where soldiers returning home from war would come to basically spend their days sleeping here and drinking until they passed on. Very, very sad. But that's how we redefined ourselves back then, was a post-war organization that would take care of people suffering from obviously the trauma of the war, the brutality that we talk about now. These are the things we talk about now that they didn't then. One article in the Ottawa Journal talked about how the bums of yesterday are becoming the heroes of today, because many people who were homeless, who had no other purpose in life, decided to go off and fight in the war. And quite a lot of homeless people back then went off to fight in the Second World War and served admirably for their country, and served the country well. So the post-war era, we can see here, they did a brochure back then. I was pleased to see this because there was a 100-year anniversary brochure. We did a 1 million hour one in 1920, or sorry, in 2020. And there's one in 1906 to 1956, the post-war era. So it was a time for prosperity and growth. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to read Ken Dryden's latest novel. It's quite his historical account, actually. It's quite interesting to see Canada that he grew up in outside, I believe it was the Toronto area in the 70s. And back then we had unprecedented growth in terms of the government commitment to build housing, to build affordable housing. This happened from the post-war years on. Our per capita gross national product had more than doubled over a few years since the end of the by about the 60s, and the economy was booming, as people know. And so our need changed, that now we became a shelter mainly for meals and beds, and that carried on through to the wild years of the 1960s, and by then we had a lot of people who were avoiding conflict. We had some of the Americans up here who were avoiding being drafted into the Vietnam War, and we became a place of refuge. And again, most of the country was booming, so our role changed from being that for soldiers to more just people who were suffering from alcoholism. Drugs were starting to be introduced into the culture a little more frequently, and we became a refuge for people through the 60s and 70s in that regard. There's some more post-war data, as you can see, where the minute the war ended, they served 10,000 more meals than they had in the previous year in that time. So this is what I'm talking about now as we hit our 75-year anniversary. You can see there's the ledger again, April 1st, 1974. And some of the names on that ledger, people booking in and the dates they were booking in, the new people to stay. But I'm looking at these pictures of the people from that era, and it's a generation that I somewhat remember, having been born in the 60s. And so we became that as things became prosperous. And eventually we got to a period we can be proud of the fact that in 1992, so again, gradually as we went from those prosperous years of government, big government, as you know, in the 70s, doing builds and all that, as the 80s came, suddenly by 1984, cutbacks and downloading at unprecedented levels as we trickled down services and downloaded services from federal to provincial to municipal. Hey, guess what's still happening today? We saw that through the 84 to 93 in particular. And our role changed then as we now had to deal with that. In the mid-90s here in Ontario, we saw many people with the government at the time, part of the common sense revolution, and the government that followed that, them were cutting back on a lot of the closing, a lot of the mental institutions in Brockville and Kingston and other surrounding areas. Well, those people still suffered from mental health issues. We now define it by different types of mental health issues. But back then, they were just released. The Mission then took an investment to grow its bed capacity by 60 beds in the mid-90s to meet the demand for our services. And as you can see, some of this building here was the expansion, and off to the back in the other direction. So in 1992, one of my heroes, the first female executive director, go figure, Diane Morrison, became the leader at the helm for 20 years here, and was an incredible leader. She and I worked as partners. I was running the food bank then, and she was just somebody who was so committed to these people. She knew them by name, and she had a passion for this organization and for the people here as the Mission continued to grow and expand its services. I'll just see my next. So you remember the dining hall you saw then. This is the dining room as it was as we came into 2000. This is the modernized kitchen that we now have that went through a renovation in 2014, about a year after us here. We invested in, we had to clean out some mold, so we decided to just redo the floors and the walls and the layout of the kitchen while we were at it. It's now a very functional, modern, industrial style kitchen, and definitely one of the cleanest in the city inspectors tell us. And beds and bathrooms. So this is the showers that you see now compared to what I show you. These are the dorm rooms, some of 8, some of 4. We moved to metal frame beds about 7 or 8 years ago because we felt that there was an incidence of bed bugs happening in the early 2000s on through, and to remove those, we went to vinyl mattresses and to beds that were made of metal. And that certainly, and we keep the place clean. Anyone who stays here, we believe dignity begins with cleanliness. So we quite often have that. We've also expanded into housing where you can see we do second stage housing. We own that apartment building. We own another one in Overbrook area where we use a mixed market housing model where those who are paying full market rent are able to as such absorb some of the costs that we can do with people who are there through rent supplements or unsubsidized housing of some form. And we also own several second stage housing units. Here's one off Gladstone that we recently renovated. That's our maintenance team. We have an in-house maintenance team. We have over 50,000 square feet here on our footprint. And this team is remarkable that they're often off-site. When we moved our addictions program off-site, when we took over the Albert Inn at off 478 Albert and turned that into a project. That team spent 6 months in there, some of them working here, some of them going off-site, taking turns to renovate that property as well too. Several years ago, so we went through some expansions. In 2002, we hired the amazing Chef Rick. In 2004, he began the food services training program, which we recently grew substantially with the takeover of the former 384 Rideau Street Rideau Bakery. And that is now Chef Rick's food services training program, a program that used to train 10 to 12 students twice a year, now trains 24 to 25 students 3 times a year, 90% of whom graduate into jobs. That's, to me, how you end homelessness. We also have expanded the primary care clinic. The building that was the addictions program that we moved off site was turned into a expanded clinic thanks to our corporate supporters from Diamond. And we've brought in mental health supports. We've changed our addictions program to be abstinence focused along with harm reduction. But we have a great program here. It's now called Addiction and Trauma Services because we get to the root of what happened in the early childhood years, the early trauma, and that we've grown as an organization. We have a hospice, a 21-bed hospice. That was my predecessor, Diane's vision. We have employment and education programs. We have that several job training programs, and we're about to launch a new one. We have a very active kitchen and bed providing the basic necessities. Our housekeeping team keeps the beds clean here, as I'd mentioned. We have a lot of other services as well too, including job search, job finding. Through our employment people, we'll work with people on their CVs or help them get their grade 12 or French as a second language. And we have a housing department that was part of one of our strategic plans. The second strategic plan in my time here was to create a housing department. So we became a housing focused, housing first shelter that we can move people out and that into other surroundings. Before we go to the Q&As, then I'll just say briefly that you're probably seeing in the news that these are unprecedented times. We're facing stresses like we haven't seen in years, whether it's the fentanyl crisis, whether it's the lately it's been the number of refugees and asylum seekers who have been coming to Canada from African countries with no one here from immigration to greet them, to service them, and they're ending up at the homeless shelters. We're seeing lineups out the door for food services, and we're, of course, like anyone else who's gone grocery shopping, we have nearly a $2 million budget for food services. We created the food truck program as a pandemic response, and now we're dealing with that demand as well too, that the pandemic's over, but we can't pull that program because so many people would go without food, and we're trying to educate the city on that we feel this is now a citywide program and we're going to need support because of the operating costs to keep it running. So it's just some of the roles, but I'll open it up to others if you want. Jacob, did you want me to now stop sharing?
Yes,
That's fine.
Peter, thank you very much. Yeah, if you finish the slides, thank you very much. So you can
Go to our
unshare.
question and answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was a fantastic presentation. If anyone has a question, you can type it into the chat box and I'll see it and ask Peter. I thought it was so fascinating to see the history of the Ottawa Mission and how long it served Ottawa's vulnerable communities. What do you think has changed the most? Like, what would surprise its founders the most that you're able to offer in terms of services?
I think just the expansion of our roles. We've been gotten into so many things that we didn't think we'd be getting into. Our staff complement has grown to meet that need. So things like the primary care clinic that's next door to where I am. We have a dental clinic, the hospice, the job training programs. For us, one of our first strategic plans, we hit those 3 pillars of bringing in mental health supports, bringing in enhancing our addiction supports, and enhancing our housing supports, so that we could address those 3 pillars that are the roots of homelessness that go together. And so all these services that are so far beyond 3 meals and a bed, and the other piece being that we do receive money from the city that is basically geared towards paying for the meals and the beds, the basic necessities. The rest of that we do through the good graces of our donors, and we have a wonderful fundraising team here. And well, people just give. We don't really have to fundraise. People get what we do and when we're in need. But our donors are great, and they look after us. And as a result, we're able to provide those other services. But the biggest part that's not included in our funding from the city is the frontline staff and what they have to go through. It's always been tough, but it's especially tough now with drugs like fentanyl and some of the other ones that are out there. So dealing with the heightened incidents, sometimes of violence, of escalating situations. And now all our staff are trained and carry around kits, naloxone kits. And part of your job, if you're on the front line, is being prepared to have to bring someone back to life and having that person's life in your hands until the paramedics arrive. And then very unfortunately, when that doesn't happen, all of our cases in October and November were successful, but in September we had 2 deaths where the frontline team weren't able to bring people back to life. And then we're dealing with the trauma of our staff now. What could I have done differently? So it is a changing environment out there. And now this refugee crisis, our doors are open for anyone who comes in. Things haven't changed. And we want to be there to provide support for the refugees, even if we're not as qualified as immigration should be doing it, but we're learning quickly. I was just talking to our frontline manager, and he said, well, the difference is so many of them, they're just so polite. They hear what we ask them to do and they do it. They're not on drugs, or they're not on alcohol. They're just people who came to this country for a better hope. They thought they'd probably be living in housing with some supports, but they seem to have been nobody there to greet them at the airport. So they're here at the mission and at some of the other family centers as well too.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine things are changing quite quickly, especially given the pandemic. And
that's right.
Yeah. What do you think is in the future for the mission, given these new challenges?
Well, we're hoping right now 2 things is the immediate and the long term. In the immediate right now, you may have seen in the news, there are 300 people sleeping rough, as we call it, on the streets, or sleeping in encampments. They're everywhere. And it's not an answer. It's happened for many reasons as we've come out of this pandemic. It's happening right across Canada. Anyone who's visited other cities in Canada, some of our staff here, the volunteers, they tell me, even myself, when I was out in Fredericton to visit my son-in-law's family, it was just crazy, the people living in encampments there in Fredericton, New Brunswick. So this is happening right across the country. So the cold Canadian winter is coming. You've heard they've opened some distancing centers, some of the former rec centers, now in Heron. There's one in Vanier, and there's another one in the Dempsey in that region, is South Ottawa as well too. So these are going to serve as centers. We're going to need more spaces, but especially with some of the refugees who have come to this country from Africa, they're not used to this climate. And the other piece is we've got to get a handle on the fentanyl overdoses that are happening, because now people have converted to smoking fentanyl, and 80% of the deaths in September were the result of people smoking fentanyl because they think it's not as harmful as injecting it. It still tells your brain not to breathe, or it stops your brain from breathing, which is why people die from it. So smoking or injecting, it's dangerous. And people can't smoke it at a supervised consumption site. So they're going outside behind a back alley and smoking it. And when they pass out, we're not aware unless one of their friends comes running. So unfortunately, people are dying now. So we need to get on top of those 2 things, I think, in the immediate future. And in the long term, to answer your question, it's we really, really have to get some housing built. We need affordable housing in this city. In 2020, City Council passed a motion that we are in crisis, that we are in a state of emergency, they called it in the motion, on housing and lack of affordable housing. and there's been very few builds since. So we need to see more geared towards housing. The problem is that's going to take years. It's even if we have the dollars, it's hard to find tradespeople now. We're going to be opening a trades training program similar to the template of Chef Rick's culinary training program sometime in the spring. We're going to get people out of homelessness and into jobs that way, as well as the culinary program. I do see a couple of questions. I think I've covered some of the health services we offer with the primary care clinic. We expanded the primary care clinic recently. It's called the Diamond Healthcare Clinic because they paid for the renovations and helped us rebuild a modern clinic. Ottawa Inner City Health through the province came to the table with extra nursing staff from 3 to 5. And now we do all tests here. So FibroScan, blood tests. Before we'd send people off to get their blood work done. Now we can do that here, and that's critical because a lot of our people have bloodborne diseases like Hep C or possibly diabetes or some other infection. We can now have them wait while they get their test results back in an hour so we can begin treatment. We have a foot care clinic. We have all sorts of medical services here in a very modern clinic, and a dental clinic as well too. So we're looking after health that way. Another question is on how women and children are supported. So as I said, we're open to provide services. Children are probably safer and better off going elsewhere. This is a men's shelter with a lot of people with mental health and other distress issues. Some people come here straight out of jail, and that's fine. We're welcoming of all. But women are welcome here for the meals, for the primary care clinic. We actually have a day set aside once a month for women only. So those who have suffered from violence can have privacy and safety and feel safe coming here. And all our job training programs, we have more women in the job training programs than we do men. Employment, education, housing, all of those efforts we do for women. We just, the beds, of course, have to be unique to men. For now, we're not doing a mixed market. This is a vulnerable population. So that would be challenging. And the other piece that we do is that the addictions program. We tried for a while to do men and women, but we're talking about a lot of people, some of their issues, why they're here are sexual. And it just wasn't a good mix to have men and women in the addictions program together because of their sexual trauma, many of them. And so we have to trust that there are some women's addictions programs out there that'll service the women, and we'll continue to focus on a unique men's addictions program. Yes, Giving Tuesday, I see another note. Thank you, was a huge success. We again reached out to our donors, and it was a great success. We had a great Blue Door Gala, and now we're in the middle of our campaign trying to raise money to put on the Christmas meal and raise donations. Obviously, donations that come in through December. Most charities acquire most of their donations in December. People are in a giving spirit, plus it's before year end. We're hoping for a successful December because that money will go to house and shelter people and keep them warm in January and February, because the doors don't close. It's 24/7, 52. We're every week of the year, we're open every hour of the day, every day of the week. So we will need to house and shelter and feed people in January and February. So money that comes in during these campaigns also goes towards that.
Peter,
yes, sure.
if people want to volunteer, is there a way for them to sign up if they want to help more than in another way than donating?
Absolutely. They can go to our website. It's ottawamission.com. I wonder if we put it anywhere on our page. We should have. It's ottawamission.com, and just sign up to volunteer. We have, for people who want to get engaged that way. And we're happy to have people come in. We're going to need them through the winter months. And it's good to see volunteers coming back. As you can imagine, the pandemic was a paralyzing a situation for us all here in the shelter system. It was very, very tough. Most of the staff here didn't get a vacation or many. They'd get time off, but they couldn't get away for a week or two, and no vacation for about the first year and a half of this pandemic. It was a very, very draining experience for us all. We
How
are
did
on the big setting, and
how did the pandemic affect the mission?
well, first thing that happened was we had to restrict ourselves where the people who were here under our roof, residents, were only allowed in for the common meal. So the 3 meals a day. We have a huge community meal program that we do, 8 a.m., 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. for the entire community. And we'll do, back then 1,400 to 1,500 meals from those community meal lines. Now we're getting closer to 2,000 since the pandemic ended. But so we immediately transitioned and opened the loading dock and started serving takeout meals from the loading dock for people who would line up around the block, so we could get them community meals that way. But most of our services, of course, the first few months, the addictions program shut down. It was only being done virtually. It's not the same meeting with an addictions counselor virtually as in person. The mental health supports all virtually. Everybody was just in panic, how soon we forget. And that's when we started the food truck program, because local food banks, local church basement programs, local community center programs that were formerly feeding people were all shut down. People who were disadvantaged, people who were elderly, who they were telling, don't go out, don't get on a bus, because there were no vaccines yet. So we expanded and started going out to apartment with some guy donated, Jim Foster, Pelican Seafood and Grill. He donated his food truck at the start of the pandemic. And Chef Rick, myself, and our CFO Brian met and said, what the heck are we going to do with a food truck? And then we realized we had the capacity. We have a kitchen, we have volunteers, we have the students in the food services training program. We had a ton of donated corporate food come in from all the corporations, the big restaurants who weren't operating. They were donating so much food. We said, let's instead of the community coming to us, which they're not allowed, let's get out to the community. And thus the food truck program was born. And now it's hard pandemic's over, but I don't know that we can take it away. People still can't afford groceries. So a bit of mission drift that a downtown shelter is doing that, but we're happy to help out the community.
I can imagine it must have been tough to transition to virtual services, because I imagine access to internet must be hard for many vulnerable people.
We have them a client services center, but again, the first few weeks, as we know, everything was shut down. And gradually we started opening up the addictions program virtually. And then the health clinic, which sort of mobilized to be out in the community doing the PCR tests and eventually doing the vaccinations and that. Gradually, we started opening up the health clinic with restrictions. The addictions program, gradually, we started opening that up with restrictions. And what a delight last year, December 2022, when we opened up our first in-house meal. We had gone through 8 previous meals or 9 where we had to do takeout, and other than that we did the meal for the in-house residents. Compared to the hopping buzz that this place normally is on Thanksgiving, Christmas, or Easter Monday when we put on those meals normally, it was so disheartening for us as staff in December last year, and now we're going to do it again this year. We've done Easter again, we did Thanksgiving, and we can't wait to do another meal on December 17th here. And watch as the volunteers are serving tables again. The whole idea was that the homeless, our guests, come in and sit at a table. And that's when we allow children in for those meals, because we want people to have a sense of community, a sense of sharing, a sense of belonging. Because other than that, they're sitting at home in a rooming house alone, and they come in here and they can have a dinner with friends and family.
That sense of community is really important.
It really is. It really is.
So Judy Gatehouse asks, who are some local partners that help your guests in other ways?
So when I talk about things like the Diamond Health Clinic expanding, they helped with the renovations. The Chef Rick's program at 384 Rideau Street is the former Rideau Bakery that the Agarwal family donated that to us free for 7 years until they developed that property. Was an amazing gift, and it enabled us to expand the food services job training program and our catering social enterprise program. So we have a lot of local partners. We just toured one family here today that's well known in the community, real estate developers, and they want to get involved and support us. We talked to them about a couple of new initiatives we're looking at. So most of our donations, though, come in through those campaigns that we run in the holiday time of year. In December, Thanksgiving, and before Easter, we do those big mail out campaigns, and online now, events like Giving Tuesday, they're a huge piece of what we do. And most of our donations, unlike some of the arts groups like the galleries and the art centers, they will get the odd $10 million donation. Some of the hospitals will get those big $1 million or $5 million donations for a new wing. And we don't get those. We get a lot of $100 donations from a lot of people who just see what we're doing and feel good and want to help the homeless. And sometimes it's spontaneous if they see a news story that I remember last year when it was minus 43 outside. I remember freezing my butt off to go out and do interviews with the media, telling them how we're looking after the homeless and the extra precautions we were taking. Well, the donations came in. People see that and say, I want to get involved and I want to help. It's a great community, a great, great concerned city. A lot of good people. So doors open. Only 25% of our funding comes from the government. The rest is from this community.
That's wonderful that our community is so giving.
Yeah.
You've been CEO for 10 years now. What are you most proud of?
I think I'm proud that when I took over the organization, I came from the food bank and we've been through several strategic plans. And although we eventually in our second strategic plan moved into some big projects like moving the addictions program offsite, expanding the health clinic, and expanding the Chef Rick's job training program by taking over the former Rideau Street Bakery. Those were big projects. We've put a couple of big projects on hold for now, more job training and stuff, just because we're all catching our breath as we come out of the pandemic, and we're making sure the mental health needs of not only the clients, but the staff team here. We've got a lot of work to do picking up the pieces. Many organizations are dealing with staff who are on sick leave or off. We haven't been. That's because we think we were there for them. We're the only non-unionized shelter in the city and non-unionized program like this. And that allows us a bit of flexibility to care for the way we extend our love and care and compassion to the employees. So I think I'm most proud of the fact that when I took over, there was a lot of pressure to buy a building, an apartment building, and it was going to cost $10 million, and that would have drained most of our reserve fund. And I listened to the staff team here. It was a new sector for me, the social services. I had been running the food bank, which was more like a logistical trucking distribution center, sending out 14 tons of food a day on trucks to different community programs. This was new: mental health supports, addiction support, trained counselors, trained nurses. And the team pushed back to me and the board and said, we need to enhance our mental health supports, our addiction supports, and our housing supports for the homeless to move them on out of the shelter. Just buying one apartment building, it was a 61-unit building, and moving 61 people into that, or 60 units, moving 60 people into that, that'll solve the problem for 6 months, but we're going to backfill. And that'll be the end of the reserve. And I listened to the team. And since then, we provide, I think, in-house mental health, addictions, and housing supports at a level like no other shelter, not only in Ottawa, perhaps in Canada, or certainly industry leaders in some of the things we do here. And now we've moved on to those big projects I spoke about too, because we saved that reserve fund. And we were able to expand into some of those other bigger projects 3 years later when we did our next strategic plan.
Mhm. That's remarkable.
Yeah, it's definitely this whole team here. It's a love and a passion. It's not a paycheck. It's not about the paycheck.
Mhm. It's very important work. What do you think is the most fascinating part of the history of the mission?
I was so impressed with our diversity of services for diverse people, like, and how over the years our population, now we are an organization that significantly helps Indigenous and Inuit peoples who come here. I remember when even 10 years ago when I started here, we were known as the shelter for older white guys and older white gentlemen, and now we're very receptive of all populations. We have services with the refugees that have been coming in. We're putting on French language services for them on Saturdays and stuff like that, so they can worship. We're open to all populations, all religions, all faiths. Somebody who's Muslim, we make accommodations for them to pray for their prayer times. And I'm proud of our diversity of services and how we've grown in that regard, and how the organization's grown to provide the services we do.
That's extraordinary, especially, adapting to changes in who's using our services and building accommodations for diverse communities.
Yes, yes. And the way we decided to help women's programming, which was part of our discussion at strategic planning, was instead of inventing the wheel, we figured an organization like Cornerstone has been providing women's services and doing it well. They also are lacking in some of the resources they could use. So we've been speaking with Cornerstone about a partnership opportunity where we'll use some of our expertise and some of our financial resources and help them expand their services to women instead of this storied men's shelter trying to get into women's services.
Yeah.
We felt that perhaps we can provide some assistance to our friends at Cornerstone. But first, we're all gonna get used to coming out of this pandemic, and then we're gonna get going on some of the projects we want to get going on. That job training superintendent, construction industry one, I can really see developing a unique program just for women to go through that program, to learn how to drywall, how to superintend, how to do those things. It'll be like the days of Rosie the Riveter from the war years, and we'll do a unique women's program working with Cornerstone, and especially working with, I've talked to one Indigenous counselor working with Indigenous women that'll and again, that way women feel safe. Women who have come from abusive homes, abusive backgrounds, feel safe being in a program with only women. So that's round 2. We're going to launch round 1, do about 5 people in the spring.
That's really exciting. It's great to hear that the mission has some really exciting projects in its future.
Yes, always fun. Keeps me excited. People ask me sometimes, especially after the pandemic, there's been a lot of pandemic burnout in this sector. I just go outside and walk around this building, or I go in at lunch hour and I talk to the people who are here visiting. Talking to one of our women, Julie. I was talking to Mary, Jana. I hadn't seen her in a while, and some of the men, John, just today on lunch hour, and it's just always inspires me and keeps me going, just to sit down with them and see how they're doing. And then I walk away from that and I go, okay, that's why I'm here. I always go for a walk around the block and speak to the homeless who are on the streets about an hour before my board meetings. So I walk into my board meeting to deal with my accountants and lawyers and doctors and trained professionals on the board in a right frame of mind, knowing why I'm here and just reminding them why they're here. And we have great board meetings.
That must be really important, keeping in touch with the community that you're helping.
Yeah. I try and follow my predecessor Diane's example and know all our customers by name, as the song goes.
That's fantastic, Peter. Thank you so much for a brilliant presentation tonight. I learned a lot, and the Ottawa Mission is such an
Now that I'm a
important-
member, I look forward to attending the next one myself. So
Yeah, we're happy to have you.
that's right.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank
And thank you, Sarah Rosati, for your help, and you too, Jacob. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much, Peter.
Good
Have
night,
a good
God
night,
bless.
everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Bye.
Bye.